Welcome back to another And Now for Something Horrible, where we talk about all the terrible things in entomology. Before we start, please like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. Comment, share. I'm sure other people out there would like to learn about bugs too, talk about all the terrible things in the world. So today I wanted to talk about honeybees, and obviously that's a favorite topic for a lot of people. Everyone loves bees. I love bees. I used to keep them for many years, both in the States and when I was living in the Caribbean. Less fun in the Caribbean because they were all killer bees. But bees have a lot of problems. And one of their older problems, one of their major problems, are something called tracheal mites. And these are parasitic mites that cause a lot of damage to them and can kill them even. But to understand them, first we have to talk about the honeybee. So this is a honeybee, and like all insects, it doesn't have lungs. It has something called trachea. And trachea are these tubes that run through their body and have openings on the outside of their body called spiracles. And this is kind of a semi-passive, semi-active breathing system. So how this works is they can either passively or actively suck air in through these tubes. And there is musculature attached to some of these sacs that you see here, and they can kind of pump them like a bellows, and it brings more oxygen in and carbon dioxide out, and passively and actively disperses through the body from the abdomen, which is where the majority of the spiracles are, up to the brain and back. So instead of lungs, they have this kind of tube system. And, you know, so the sacs kind of act like a lung, but it's not like a mammalian lung or a vertebrate lung. Insect breathing doesn't occur that way. Instead, they have these tubes called trachea. So enter our villain. So this is our villain, Acarapis woodi. So literally it means bee mite. Apis is bee and Acari is mite. So this is an electron micrograph of a very zoomed in image of a male tracheal mite. They're very, very small. They have to be small enough, remember, to fit inside the breathing tubes of the bees. And if you think of the average size of a bee, and that breathing tube is, right on the side of its body, it's very, very tiny. It has to crawl in there. So Acarapis woodi is a mite that was first discovered on the Isle of Wight in Europe in 1904. And it didn't arrive into the U.S. until 1984. But once it got here, it moved very, very quickly. It basically covered the entire United States in about 5 years. They live inside the trachea of the bees. And once they get inside a colony through an infested bee, there's basically no way of getting rid of these guys. Because they reproduce very quickly and they're very hard to get to. It's only the female that moves between bees, and she does this when the bees are in close contact with each other. Within a hive, it's pretty tight, so the bees are always moving against each other, so she can jump from one bee to another and cause an infestation that way, or an infection in the new bee. And she frequently does this with bees as soon as they emerge as adults from their pupal chambers. And then she manages to crawl inside the trachea. So what you're seeing here, these are the trachea. So this trachea has been dissected out of a bee. These little rings that you see around it, these are supporting coils. Basically, it's kind of like your dryer tube, the tube that comes off the back end of your dryer. It's that like accordion tube. The rings help give stability to the trachea, but these are the tubes that the oxygen passes through. And all of these mites and their eggs are inside this trachea. And once they're in there, they not only do they block the flow of oxygen because they're so large, it would be like having a marble stuck in your throat, and a single bee can have hundreds of these within their trachea. But they also bite into the sides of the trachea because they feed on the blood of the bee. So they're biting, nibbling, drinking the blood, depleting the bee of the blood, so they're weakening it that way. And they're also suffocating the bee by blocking airflow. And here's more. So it gets very, very dense. So you have a mite here, you have a mite here, you have a mite here, you have a mite here. They'll lay eggs in here. They leave their waste, all sorts of disgusting things. So as this infestation increases, The bee loses the ability to breathe for the most part, and because of this, they rapidly lose the ability to fly. They don't have enough oxygen or the ability to make enough energy to sustain flight. So frequently, the first sign that a colony will show of an infestation of these is that you'll see a lot of bees crawling around the front end of the colony at the entrance because they can't take off. They don't have the energy to fly, so they're just relegated to the ground. So this seriously weakens the bee, if not outright kills them. And as this spreads, the entire colony becomes weaker and weaker, and it becomes more susceptible to infections because it has all these wounds where the mites are biting at the tracheal system. So then they can get bacterial or fungal infections that way, and this spreads through between colonies through something called worker drift. So let me show you. So if you have an apiary, so an apiary is what you call a place where you keep a lot of honeybee colonies. So like if you're a professional beekeeper, you will have an apiary, and you basically have a bunch of bee colonies stacked up next to each other. So let's say that you have 6 there, although apiaries can have literally thousands of bee boxes. Sometimes the workers get lost. And so let's say that a worker comes out of this bee colony, and she's flying around, bzz, 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 and she comes back, and sometimes she gets lost and she'll come back into this colony. And that's not actually a big deal. Drones sometimes do this too. If it's just like 1 or 2 workers, the neighbor colony will take them in. They usually are coming back in with food anyway, so they're not too mad about it. They usually won't kill them. They'll just accept them in. Same with drones. But if that bee was infected, now she's coming in here, and she now has infected this hive. And this happens all the time. So it actually spreads really, really fast. The other thing that happens with bees is that they will rob each other of honey. So sometimes if there's if the beekeeper comes out and opens this colony and is collecting honey, bees from these other colonies will try to come over and grab some of that honey. And when they do, they can get infected that way. So it spreads really, really fast. And then within a colony, it spreads mostly during the winter. It's worse during the winter. So if you do have a bee box, what do bees do during the winter? Because they're not active, and the bees actually survive through the winter. And what they do is they form a ball in the center of the colony, and they do this to keep warm. So they go from the outside inside. They kind of migrate around the ball, and they vibrate rapidly, and this generates heat. And in the middle of this ball is the queen. But if any of these bees are infected with this mite, because they're in such close proximity to each other, they all just become infected. So during the winter, it's particularly bad. The establishment of this in Europe and the United States, and now it's basically everywhere except for Australia, did serious damage to honeybees. Now it's considered kind of a minor issue. It's a major issue if you're in very cold climates, because the winter tends to be longer. But this did serious damage. It kind of drove a lot of bee strains and races to near extinction. They endangered quite a few of them. And there are a number of bees that have particular susceptibility to this. So like I believe the German black bee was driven almost to extinction. There's not many of them left anymore. Nowadays, beekeepers can kind of control this a little bit, although you can't really get rid of it entirely. So this is probably my favorite picture of what's going on here. So this is an electron micrograph of a cross section of a bee trachea. So this is the trachea, and in here are the mites. So you can see how large these are relative to the trachea. You have an egg, you have their feces and their cast skins and all this other stuff that builds up, and you have another one in the back. It really starts to block the flow of oxygen, and this is how it kills the bee. It's really, really awful. Because this is such a tight space, it's not great for getting rid of them. And you're kind of limited in what you can do, because normally when you have a problematic mite or an insect, you would use an insecticide, which you can't really do because it will kill the bees. So how do you deal with this? So one way that they do this is, like I said, there were a number of races and strains of bees that were driven into endangerment or extinction, but there were also a number of bees that became extremely resistant. So they started breeding those resistant strains. The buckfast bee is one of the more famous ones. And the way that these bees are resistant is that they clean themselves constantly. They have really, really good grooming practices. So they're cleaning themselves, they're cleaning the other bees, they're cleaning up the hive, and it drives down the mite population because they're constantly killing them when they're trying to move around between bees. The other thing that beekeepers can do is they will feed the bees these things that are called oil cakes. Basically, it's a mixture of vegetable oil and sugar, and you make these cakes out of them, and the bees love the sugar, so they'll go up and they'll eat a bunch of the sugar, and they kind of rub the oil all over themselves, and it effectively smothers the mite, similar to how you would you can put petroleum jelly over like a tick if it's embedded really bad in your skin, and it smothers the mite. It can't breathe. So now bees can kind of do that. They can either clean themselves or they can massage oil into themselves, and it will kill these mites. But that's really the only good solutions we have. There was a little bit in the past about treating them with menthol. I don't think it was particularly useful. But if you don't do these treatments as a beekeeper, especially if you're in an area with a long winter, the bees will succumb to this. They will suffocate. They will die, and you'll lose entire colonies. So I just wanted to let you guys know about that. I'll talk to you guys later. But in the meantime, feel free to comment or share. It really helps me out. Talk to you later.